cooking, and I hope that you will see shades of light and dark without which no painter would ever be able to create in my story. Because in Brazil they say, long ago there was no dark. There was no shadow. There was no night. There was no darkness. Just beautiful San Diego sunshine all the time. Even more so. And people didn't sleep well because there was no darkness anywhere, no shade, no shadow. They would just go until they were tired, and they would fall right where they stood and sleep until they woke up again, but no one ever felt completely rested. All over the land. But there was a place that there was darkness. In the realm of the sea goddess. Under the ocean, there was every kind of darkness and shadow, from the inkiest black at the bottom of the trenches to the dappled green-gray in the shallows where the sea creatures played. And in that realm, there was a daughter of the sea, and her name was Lee. And she was an adventurer, and she was brave and strong, and she would play all day with her two friends, a conch that she would carry in her hand or perhaps on her shoulder, and a manta ray that she named Ray. And Ray would go swim right beside her as she would teeter on the edge of those dark, deep abysses, and as she would swim in the shallows, and as she would scatter a group of sharks or play castles in the coral reef. And the three of them were playing castles in the coral reef one day when Lee looked up and saw an underwater storm approaching the reef. And it was so strong and so terrible, and it was headed right for the reef, and she knew that it would shatter that coral reef and displace all those animals, and so she put that little conch down and said, "Protect the reef." And she took her friend Ray, and the two of them gathered all the daughter of the sea magic they could, and they began to swim around and around and around the reef, building a wall of water. And when they had got it strong enough, just in time, the storm hit that wall and spun off, saving the reef. But it created a water spout. And Lee and Ray were thrown up out of the ocean, out onto the land, and they came down with a thump at the bottom of a mountain. And Lee looked around, and she said, "It is so beautiful here. Look at the blue of the sky. Oh, the subtle shades in the clouds. I can hear birds and bugs." And as she looked down, her lovely iridescent inside of an oyster color skin was turning to deep dark bronze, and her hair that had been the dark green of a turtle's shell, clasped all over with sea anemones and sea urchins, turned into a lustrous black, and the urchins and anemones turned into red hibiscus and creamy jasmine and white gardenia. And the scent was so heady, Lee thought she might be drunk. And then she looked over at her friend Ray, and he was changing as well. He was changing his shape, and he was growing all these glossy feathers along wings, black feathers with a little white beak. and he flew over to a willow tree and began to sing, as the blackbird in the spring, 'neath the willow tree, sat and piped, I heard him sing, sing of Oralee. And she said, Ray, I didn't know you could sing. And she looked up at the top of the mountain, and she saw people, a village. And so she started to run up to the top of the mountain, followed by Ray flying along behind her. And when she got up to the village, she told the people who she was, where she'd come from, and a family took her in and taught her how to be a person on the land. And then they introduced her to the chief's son. And they fell in love immediately. And when she had been married to the chief's son for a year and a day, she fell ill. She remembered her home and darkness, and the sun seemed to really hurt her head, and she couldn't get up. Well, the chief's son and the family who had taken her in, they plotted together, what can we do? How can we save her? And they decided to get the 3 strongest warriors from the people in the village. They put the woman in charge, and the 2 bigger men, they sent the 3 of them down to the ocean, and they called out, please, please send us darkness for Oralee. And from out of the ocean came an enormous bag, and it came up and out and landed next to those 3 warriors, and it was easily 3 times the size of any one of them. And then they heard a voice that said, this bag is only for the daughter of the sea. No hand must touch it, but that of Oralee. And they said, oh yeah, sure, of course. But they were already trying to figure out how they could possibly lift this bag. And the 3 of them got it up and started across the beach to go up the mountain. And I did say they were strong and brave, but I never said they were smart. And they just couldn't figure it out. And at last the woman said, put it down, I need a nap. And she fell where she was, and she took a nap. And so the 2nd warrior crawled in beside the bag, and he fell asleep. But the 3rd one was like, there's got to be something we can do. And he reached out and he opened the bag, thinking, we'll give some to each of us. But as soon as that bag was open, darkness poured out of it, covering all of the light. And they were frightened. The warriors were frightened, and the people on the mountain were frightened, and the warriors picked up the bag, and as best they could stumble through the darkness, they made their way back up to the top of the mountain where people were wailing and crying, and they said, what should we do? What should we do? And their wailing and crying woke Oralee, and she said, darkness. But then she looked around. People were not happy. They were scared. So she reached into the bag that was almost empty now. And there at the bottom was her almost forgotten friend, the conch. And that shell began to glow. And she raised it in the air, and all the darkness swirled around the shell. And she divided the darkness and the light into day and night. And she could see that people were still frightened of the dark. So she hung her friend, the conch, and that became the moon. And in Brazil they say that is how night came to be. And if you go to Brazil and you take a deep breath in the evening, you can smell the scents of jasmine and hibiscus and gardenia. And sometimes If you listen very carefully, you might even hear her friend, Ray. Orally, orally, made both dark and fair, sunshine mixed with land and sea, sweet flowers in your hair.